Welcome to Software Engineering Daily. I'm your host for today's episode, Joe Nash, and today I'm joined by David Erosa and Daniel Márquez of the Game Kitchen, creators of Blasphemous and its recent sequel, Blasphemous II. David and Daniel, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me today.
Hi, thank you. I'm David. I'm the producer for Blasphemous 2. With us is Dani. Dani?
Yeah, I'm Daniel. Dani. I'm one of the programmers of the game.
Awesome. Thank you for putting out your job titles as well. Very helpful. And very excited to talk to you today about Blasphemous 2, which I've been playing quite a lot of in the lead up to this. So I guess to kick us off, you mentioned your roles there. We've got a producer and a programmer. Can you talk a little bit about what it is you do at the Game Kitchen and also on Blasphemous?
Well, I always joke by describing my job as I try to prevent people from, tearing each other apart. The producer role is trying to get in sync every of the different aspects that are involved in game development. So you have to know a little bit about programming, a little bit about art, animation, audio, to be very knowledge of how all these different areas are related during the development of a game and the dependencies that are involved, and to get to agreements with our publisher in order to keep everyone happy about the progress of the game. So let's say that it's my fault that I'm guilty for everything that isn't really working, as that's my responsibility.
It's a very relevant theme with Blasphemous. You are the penitent one for the whole studio.
Well, I wasn't the producer for Blasphemous 1. That was Mauricio, who is the current CEO and director of the studio. I took that role for Blasphemous 2.
Awesome. Perfect. And Dani, your role as a programmer?
Yeah, well, as a programmer is a wide variety of stuff, but mainly in this game, I was responsible for system and, let's say, architecture, or in a way. Also rendering stuff too, but mainly systems and architecture.
Awesome. Perfect. We'll definitely want to dig into that shortly. But for folks who haven't played either of the games, can you introduce Blasphemous 2 to us? And I guess the wider world of Blasphemous as well would be useful.
Well, Blasphemous the second game is a Metroidvania game. The first one was more an action platformer. Some people call it a Souls-like game. That wasn't really the original intention, but people gave it that description. But Blasphemous 2 is a pure Metroidvania game that is based on a lot of the Spanish culture. It's a dark fantasy inspired by Spanish painting, architecture, religion inspired. We try to avoid direct references to any kind of religion, but the inspiration is in there.
Awesome. Yeah, I have to confess, I didn't know about a lot of the associated iconography before I played the game. And while I was looking at other interviews about the game and Leadby, I saw you comment on Spanish Holy Week in another one, and I looked at the images from Spanish Holy Week and I was just like, oh, okay, I get it now. I understand. I understand the aesthetic vibe. I'd highly, for any listeners who haven't seen it, definitely look it up. It's definitely an aesthetic. So I guess onto the implementation of the game. What is Blasphemous 2 built in? What are we talking in terms of engine and technologies?
Okay. It's built upon Unity engine, and we are using some plugins here and there, but almost everything is written by us from scratch in Unity. Yeah, that's okay. We didn't we code from zero. We didn't reuse anything from the first part. I had to say I wasn't on the first Blasphemous, so we built this from the ground up upon Unity.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean that was one of the areas I was really interested in. That as you approach a sequel, especially when there's a lot of shared aesthetic, it's still they're 2D side-scrolling platformers, etc. How you think about code reuse? How you think about, hey, are we building on the previous game? Is it starting scratch? What was that process like with going from Blasphemous 1 to 2?
What I have to say, just because I wasn't there on the first one, I can answer really with much, I don't know the truth or the correct answer, but this one we are making sure this one is reusable. Okay, so we didn't make the same mistake again. So
I know the reason, because I was there during the development of the 3 DLCs. When we made the decision to start the sequel, one of the discussions was, of course, what do we do? Do we reuse the old, let's say, the old framework that we built for the first game, or should we start from scratch? And this is a really tricky decision because, of course, on one hand, you have the whole game already built. Most people will think that this is just a matter of, or let's say, switching assets. But the harsh truth is that we wanted to explore many design paths that would be maybe not impossible, but really difficult to implement using the old framework. For example, we only had one weapon in Blasphemous 1, and we have 3 of those in the sequel, and that's something that I find I can't even start to imagine how would that be implemented. Also, there were many little things, not little, sorry, a lot of really important things for the gameplay feeling, mainly the controller of the character, that were not great in Blasphemous 1. When the game was released, we are aware that it could be really improved, and the controller was improved for the DLCs. But we knew we could do that better. But the only way to do it was to start from scratch. This is something that we are asked about quite frequently. Why did you start a new project from scratch instead of reusing Blasphemous code? It's something that we can't really recommend to everyone. It's a risky decision, and we can't guarantee that everyone would success in making this. So it's not something that we will recommend. We took the risk, and it turned out okay, but it could not have been this way. So
right. Yeah, it's very interesting. I think a lot of folks would be surprised to hear that like adding extra weapons is such a huge constraint. But I guess if you've got a design of a game that's, not assuming there's any reason to switch weapons from the start, it's really, really baked in. I want to follow up on something that Dani said, and to your last point there, that you wouldn't recommend starting code from scratch. And Dani, you mentioned that Blasphemous 2 has been built to be reusable into the future. Can you talk a little bit about some of the ways that's happened?
Let's say we built the features around, how can I say, let's use the term that Unity make it trendy, like the data-oriented dots technology, something like that, which you said in our framework. It's okay. Don't take me like I'm an expert, but it's like an array of stuff. Okay, and we built our engine around modules. Okay, let's say the managers of systems that just manage stuff. Okay, and you, let's say you just have to add or remove modules in order to implement a feature. This way, for example, let's say some basic example. Let's say you want like
For example, the rendering, the effect rendering.
Okay, well, I'll say that I was looking something simple, but we want like I'm thinking on a better example that can be used for this or using that. Let's say you want platforms that when the player, groans stand on them, they dissolve. Okay,
Right.
they
Collapse.
exactly. But we build this module. Okay, that's this the component of that when the player stands still, that will disappear. Okay, so we want to remove it. Just we on our let's say config table, we remove that module, and nothing is executed. So that's our first stepping stone. Let's say like this way. With that in mind, build all the features. Okay, so we can build features that in the end they are easy to remove. Okay, maybe we made a little harder to implement, but then it's just a tool. Okay, I don't want this feature anymore, so remove it from the core of the game. So that's our that's one of the bases on how is built the framework.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, we could say that Blasphemous 1 was like a monolithic kernel.
Sure.
Blasphemous 2 is more modular.
Okay.
Yeah, and more like I know that the term that data oriented, like, okay, you got a system, you got components, and the system could be internally implemented how harder you want, but it's like an array of components.
Sure.
And then you have the game is nothing more, or our logic engine of our logic game is nothing more than a for loop with a deterministic order of modules that, okay, that platforms that disappear, okay, player movement, inputs, reading inputs, etc., etc.
Awesome. So it's been a little while. I don't think I've touched Unity properly since like 2016. But it sounds to me this Unity dots thing sounds to me like an entity component system. Is that correct? This is the evolution
Exactly.
of ECS. Awesome. Perfect. I understand. Awesome. That's great. So with that in mind, I guess like when you're thinking about, we want this game to be reusable, and this might be a question that I'm not allowed to ask, but like, is that just for future DLCs, or are you talking like other games entirely outside the Blasphemous universe? Is it like, we just want to make sure if we do another Blasphemous, we're not writing from scratch without committing to doing another Blasphemous?
That would be the ideal situation.
Cool. I understand.
But theoretically, in other games too. In fact, awesome. Some modules are being reused in our prototypes.
Awesome. Very cool. So during that, David, you mentioned the movement, which was one of the things that like when you look at, Blasphemous players talking about Blasphemous 2, so many people are talking about the control and the movement being like super improved. And you said that was, a bit of a complicated process. Can you talk a little bit about what the problems were with like the movement in Blasphemous, or the control in Blasphemous 1, and how you overcome those for 2?
I'm here about at the same situation that Dani. I wasn't during the development
Sure.
of Blasphemous 1. I was one of the backers of the Kickstarter, and I already knew them.
That is awesome. That is a journey.
Yeah. No, well, we were friends. We knew each other. I already knew Dani as well on that time, but I've heard about that, and I had to deal with the code during the DLCs.
Sure.
So the reason is that Blasphemous was the first platformer game that was made in the game kitchen. The previous game, The Last Door, is a point-and-click adventure game which has nothing to do with that, with this kind of games. So this code was written by Paco, who I hope doesn't listen this. But he's the one that tells this story. So it was made, like they could. It's not something that they had experience with, and it was the first game that Paco made. So that was the best effort that could be put into the game with the resources that they had, which were not many. Time, money, even having a Kickstarter that was successful is not as much money as people think. Money flies when you talk about game development, and it's something that we really wanted to improve, in the sense that, hey, now we know what we want to do with the controller, and I think that we could. Dani, correct me with this, but I think that we got even a little bit obsessed with the controller of the character.
Yeah, I can do it a little trip hope. I'll try my best again with the language, but the character controller. Okay, let's say something obvious. Is basic implementation is the character and the controller. Obviously, the character is like the physical and appearance, okay, like the locomotion and the animations part. That's the character. But then you got the controller, that it's the inputs and the logic you do with that inputs and with the queries from the locomotion and from the character. So we wanted to improve this a little, okay, as I said, that's you can let's look even going a little deeper and say, okay, character controller, just not the character, another just there's another modules. Let's say locomotion, say animation, inputs, and I say the logic you do with that thing, and then that logic we divide it with something we call abilities. And these abilities are nothing more than states that can be executed concurrently or exclusively. So we got what I call, that I think I didn't invent it, like a hierarchy, finite, concurrent state machine. Okay, the controller itself, what it does is manage these abilities. Okay, like for example, jump. When you jump, you cannot crouch. So when the ability of jumping is executed, it blocks the ability to jump. But for example, you can attack, so that can be executed concurrently along with the jump. And this way, you got kind of flexibility, and you can manage, you can scale and manage the complexity of the controls, because it okay, then inside each ability or each state, you can implement it as a state machine too. Okay, so that's why it's hierarchical. But inside that ability, you can do more or less like whatever you want in order to do the behavior, or do make the player, the character do what you want. So we got like the inputs, the locomotion, the animation part, and the abilities, and just our controller just manage. Then okay, you can execute. You can you cannot execute right now, but you can interrupt this one with this ability and things like that. So with that approach, I think we made something that works pretty well.
Yeah, that
Much
sounds
better.
like
In Blasphemous 1, for example, I remember the ladder climbing ability. For trying to find a bug on the ladder climbing, you had to check on 3 or 4 different places, including the animator state machine, which was a nightmare. Because I think that, well, Paco did, but it was almost impossible for anyone that wasn't Paco to try to deal with the controller issues. Now, with the architecture that Dani and the rest of the team made, it's way more easy to. I was going to say to fix issues, but there are no issues.
Well, it sounds like so. Whenever I think about this topic, the thing that always comes to mind is like the stories you hear of platformers like Super Meat Boy or Celeste, where they say they have like an 1,000-line file of if statements just for the movement and the platforming, right? And so that sounds like a very as you say, flexible architecture. So you mentioned interrupts there, which I think in action RPGs and anything with, like precisely timed boss combat is always something that players are very conscious on. Like, can I interrupt this ability with a block, for example? This sounds like this architecture allows you to like, change that and swap it easily, right?
Okay, for example, okay, that's just for curiosity. I'm a really Street Fighter 3 fan, okay? And the attack ability, okay, that itself, it's the machine, okay? I really wanted to try to simulate as good as we can that game, because it's really cool how the interruptions of each attack are done. And at least me, I wanted that kind of flexibility, that okay, you can interrupt this ability, for example, the dash. You can, from this frame to this frame, you can interrupt that with the jump. So you can interrupt or you can interrupt this with this attack. So you can do I don't know that I try to do, the
like the lunge, lunge.
Lunge, exactly. Yeah. That's the word, lunge. And things like that. And we made that. Okay, we built a round of tools, a bunch of tools around the frames, like the hit frames or the cancellation frames, and was that was part of of our main objective.
That's awesome. Yeah, I started with the big mace, Veredicto, whatever. Yeah, and then the first weapon I unlocked was the pair of rapiers, and it really suddenly felt like I went from like, oh, I'm just going around smashing stuff, and that's relatively simple, to like, oh, suddenly I need to be caring about interrupts and doing fancy tricks with when I pull off different attacks and dashes and lunges. It was a really like striking gameplay transition. Which actually, I guess, do you want to introduce the free weapons and how they influence the gameplay, whichever one works?
Yeah, something that we knew for sure. We had a lot of, doubts about what we wanted to do with the sequel, but something that we knew for sure was about having multiple weapons. We weren't sure how many of those, but it's something that we definitely wanted to explore. And also the community have asked about that a few times. Hey, it would be cool if we could use different weapons. So, and it was really hard trying to do something that could compare to the weapon of the first game, because the sword, mea culpa, was kind of iconic to the game. So we had to try to find something that matches that sense of wonder of the first weapon. And that's where I'm sorry, we, code names for the weapons and the elements of the game are stuck in our head. And
yeah,
I have to think a lot about the real, the public names of the weapons. Is that? The sword.
Sarmiento y Centella.
The single sword?
Sarmiento y Centella, those are the pair of rapiers, which
Rosary,
we call...
No, Rosary.
Rosary blade is the internal name for the...
Yeah.
What was that? Sorry, Rosalind blade?
Rosary blade.
Oh,
Yeah.
Rosary blade. Got it.
Rosary blade.
Yeah. Awesome.
We have a lot. Game development is full of silly names.
Cool code names, yeah.
And silly sometimes. So that weapon is kind of like a cousin of the mea culpa, because they really share the moveset.
Right.
So there we had the let's say mea culpa. But then we wanted to have more variety of gameplay. So that means we need something really powerful but slow. So you have to really commit when you decide to attack with it. That's the sensor.
Yeah, very veredicto, which I'm putting.
Ruego al alba.
Ruego al alba could be.
That's the rosary blade.
Ruego al alba. Okay,
I thought it was all.
Okay,
you mix those.
I thought it was the other.
Okay, so the one big sword, the rosary blade, as you call it, is Ruego al alba. That's the replacement for mea culpa. Okay, I understand.
Yeah. It's really embarrassing when you come to these interviews and you don't know the real name of the stuff in your game.
Honestly, it's delightful. As a big fan of name-driven development, I'm really enjoying hearing like the internal code names and picturing how they came about.
But sometimes people ask us about something and we are like, I don't know what you're talking about. So yeah, I forgot the name again. The sensor is it's really heavy and it punches with a lot of power and it's really powerful, and it has this spinning attacks that feel really nicely. But it's kind of slow, so you have to be careful when you use it, because once you commit to attacking with it, we say that you are sold to the enemy. You are at his mercy. And on the other side, we have the pair of rapiers, which are Sarmiento y Centella. Yeah. Which is blazing fast, but deals a little bit less damage. And that's, the three approaches that we wanted to try with the three weapons. We find that 3 is a proper amount of weapons to have in this kind of game. We could talk during hours about the weapon switching feature.
Yeah, that was the
Um,
first moment when I realized how quick it was to change weapon and how you were expected to change in midair to continue moving, for example. That was the moment where I was like, oh, the skill ceiling on this game is so much higher than I had appreciated so far. Like, it suddenly feels very, like you have to have a lot. You have to
weapon,
understand a lot.
the mechanic for changing the weapon, I think, correct me, Danny, was it 4 or 5 iterations of the weapon exchange?
Don't remember, but I have to say that the difficult part wasn't the technical. It's like the feeling
Yeah.
was more like that doesn't feel great. Let's try another thing, and then another thing, and let's try stopping the game for
half a second,
half a
or
second,
let's
or less.
slow down time, or
Doesn't feel quite good.
Yeah.
let's
and in
pop
the
up
end,
this wheel
exactly.
selection.
I guess just to give an
worked.
example for listeners who haven't played, so like a case where this might come in, for example, the pair of rapiers, you can use those to ride these like currents of light, and then at the end of that, there might be a bell you have to smash with the sensor. So you have to, while you're midair, change from the rapiers to the mace really quickly after just having done this jump. So I can see why you'd be experimenting with, delays or wheels, etc. That's really interesting.
Yeah, but that introduced, for example, slowing down time introduced the problem of, hey, people can use this to beat bosses way easier that we intended, because they can slow down time and have time to dodge projectiles or to think about what to do. So this was maybe one of the most challenging aspects of the game. One of the most, not.
Yeah. Oh, well, we'll come back to what the most was. But I guess while we're on the weapons, one thing that I think is really interesting, you described the game as a Metroidvania. So, this idea of gaining equipment and abilities to unlock new areas. But you do that through the weapons as well. They're not just like, hey, I've got a weapon in my inventory, I have a new style of attack. They're also your navigation ability, your obstacle clearing ability. And then you can choose any of them to start with. So like that just seems like a whole heap of design problems, like the layout of the world, which areas can people do first, what order do they get the weapons in? How did that decision to give the players that much flexibility come about, and how on earth did you start dealing with that?
That's one of those situations in which maybe you make the decision before knowing the consequences. No, truth is that we knew what we were assuming when we decided to give players that selection of weapons. And it was quite a challenge for the whole team, mostly for level design because they had to take into account that players could go 3 or 4 different paths when they started playing the game. So you have to be able to traverse the world with any of the weapons, and you had to be able to beat the 3 first bosses with any of the weapons. So it was an interesting challenge, but I think that it was worth it.
Yeah, I would definitely say so. It adds it's one of those things where as you're playing a game and you realize kind of what is happening and how things would play out if you restarted the game. It was one of those elements where I was like, oh, this is very interesting. So you mentioned that the weapons weren't the hardest technical challenge you faced, which I have to ask, what was the hardest challenge?
I'm waiting for Dani.
Okay. Don't get me wrong, but we are doing a little indie game. We are not doing AAA games, so just take it with a grain of salt.
Of course.
Maybe one of the things I found difficult was we weren't in charge of the port. Okay, but Switch has some memory limitations. Okay, and our artists tend to use really large textures. So that was a little challenge.
Yeah.
And also remember that physics weren't smooth as we wanted, but that was not in Switch that a little, but it was just with simple optimizations and level of detail with physics that was more than okay. But in PlayStation 4,
That was really interesting.
Truth be told, I didn't know how much optimization to do. Luckily, one of the guys from the porting team got an answer from Unity, which I don't know how it works because it was like use that instead. Okay, use move the 5.6 thread on a different thread, and there you go.
Interesting.
Because they were facing with the issue of having zones of the game which were running at 60 FPS on the Switch that dropped to 40 on the PS4.
Wow, that's not the order round I would have expected. Yeah.
That was our reaction. We were, the Xbox One and PS4 version were released a couple of months after the release of the game, and we were pretty confident about the performance of the game on those platforms. But when the producer of the console port told me, "Hey, we are hitting a severe frame drop on many zones of the game on PS4," I thought that he was joking. Yeah. I thought, this is a console programmer joke that he's making fun of me. But no, he showed me the benchmarks of the different zones. It was true. There was a huge drop in performance on PS4.
And when you don't know the reason, it's something that when I read it, I was like, I have no idea. I don't know how much or how. I don't know what to do in order to help them.
Yeah. In the end, it turned out to be, as you said, something really deep really deep, something from the internals of Unity, how it manages different threads or something like that. Dani, can you say yes or no?
Yeah, yes, because there was I can't do any less raycast, or we can't do any less use of the physics. Just we implemented it was very basic, but it was a level of detail. Okay, when the enemies are not on screen, like they are likely puppets, just or just a little. They don't use, or they use a little instead. For example, instead 5 or 3 raycast, just 1, and then it's just the bare minimum. We can do anything.
We couldn't
more.
do less or less.
Because if we do less, it's like leave the NPC or the enemy just idle, and the player will notice it. Will notice it.
The world freezes when you're off, when you're not on that screen, right? Yeah. Fascinating. Yeah, that's console porting has been widely discussed on social media and stuff recently because of Godot, and Godot not having not coming with facilities for compiling to console like Unity does, and it just seems so many obscure complexities that you need to ask the console developers or porting houses for help with, right? That seems like an impenetrable issue. Fascinating. So earlier you mentioned the bosses, and I wanted to ask a little bit about that because in this type of game, with the combat system, and I guess as you said, players had kind of given it a Souls-like label on the first one. Obviously, players are very sensitive to boss design, and building a satisfying boss is a whole thing. Was there a particular feeling that you wanted the bosses to have? Is there like, how did you go about designing them?
Well, this is kind of hard to answer. First, because it's not our direct
Sure.
area. But I can say that basically the whole team is always involved in nearly every aspect of the game. Art, enemies, how the game feels, and bosses is one of those places in which everyone has something to say, mainly from the creative direction of the game, where we strive for the bosses to be related to the song they are appearing, and trying to be meaningful for the whole story, the game, for the lore. So we try to approach those in a way that they add to the game. They are not in there just for the sake of being a boss in the middle of, I don't know, of a palace or in the middle of a basement. They have a reason to be there, and they contribute to the lore of the whole game. So the design has to be something that is split between creative direction and game design, and they work together into defining what's going to be the aspect of this boss, what role does it play on the story that we are telling, and from that point, they keep on working together to define how it should be. Should this be a humanoid, a human-sized boss? Should it be huge? Does it fly? Does it have multiple? I think we don't have flying. Well, yes, we have one flying boss, which is, I don't know the real name, but it's Susona. Maybe it's Susona, the real name.
And I think another one was the. I was going to say the girl in the elevators.
Okay.
I don't remember the name.
It's not a girl, but a ghost.
The ghost. Okay, the ghost girl. Okay, the ghost.
I guess it also depends on your definition of flying. The embroiderer, does a flying thing at points, right?
Yeah. The embroiderer. That's.
I don't know. I can't remember the name. Yeah.
That's a really popular boss, and I like her a lot. We have our favorites as well in the studio.
Awesome.
I was going to say as a joke as a feature, an inter feature we had. I remember with the bosses and enemies. For example, in the game, you can change, because when you build a boss, maybe you try some behaviors in order to see if the animations are playing correctly or something like that. The game has a hidden feature that you can swap the controls to that character and play a little, test it a little. Also, it wasn't really used much, but it was there, and I used maybe twice, but it was there.
Awesome.
Just to say that, it's another feature we had in order to test the bosses.
Yeah, I mean that is great to hear, because I there are so many. You spoke about the iterations for things like the movement and the controls and the weapons, and things like bosses and platforming segments are another area where I imagine there must be so much testing and iteration for feel. As like as you mentioned, as like an indie studio, as a smaller studio, what does that testing look like? Like, I think people tend to imagine focus groups and huge open betas and that kind of thing, but what does it look like for a studio of your size?
Well, it's not until it's not until the game is mostly done that we don't start testing in the studio. I think that the first playtesting session was a year before the release. I think it was August 22. That was the first time we had someone from outside of the studio to come and play the game. And that was a point in which you are supposed not to be changing many things.
Sure.
Because we had the content complete and the gold version, and the content complete was in February or April, maybe 23.
And what was the total development time?
It was 37 months.
Very producer answer.
Yeah. Because I remember that people tend to say 3 years, but
Right.
it started in July, so no, it was 37.
Cool.
So it was in August, and the content complete was set for February or April 23, and the gold version for, I think it was May, 1st of May, something like that. So there wasn't really a lot of time to make important changes, but we did change things based on that playtesting session. Well, of course, a playtesting is not the same as a QA session. The publisher starts with the QA of since very early in the development process, but that's technical testing. We wanted to see the reaction from players.
Yeah.
So we tried
sure
to
the game doesn't break and that kind of thing, right?
Yeah. Cool. And what we wanted to test was the reaction of people who hasn't been playing the game here in front of their faces for 3 years, well, for 2 years, because somehow not somehow, it's because you have been playing the game forever. You lose perspective of the game and you fail to see the mistakes or the things that could be improved. So there's this moment in which you need fresh eyes on the game. So we brought people to the studio. I think it was like 12 people that we knew, or most of them we knew personally, but because we needed, when you make this kind of testing sessions, you need people, how do you say this? You don't need a fan who will be happy with whatever they play, because they are excited to try the sequel of the game, so everything will look great. Well, we wanted to have people who are brutally honest with the game. Yeah, a hater.
Excellent.
So yeah, we contacted these people some of them were friends of us, and asked them to be brutally honest with the game. And from that session, we got a lot of good feedback that we implemented. One of the feedbacks that we got was related to the weapon change system. Okay. I remember we give them, pen and paper so they can write down their thoughts and their comments, and then they fill a form online with their thoughts. And there was something, one of the players left the paper on the desk, and there was this comment. I'm trying to translate it. Sorry for my French in here, but it said, "Weapon changing, motherfucker."
Excellent.
So when we saw this, we were suspecting that the system wasn't really what people expected, but that phrase, that comment, confirmed it.
Yeah.
That was in August, and then we had another playtesting session in February. I think it was February, barely a month before the content complete, which was really risky. It was barely a month before delivering the alpha of the game. So there was not enough time to make huge changes.
Sure.
But being as we are, we made big changes in some systems that we weren't really happy about, like some things that maybe people take for granted, like when do you save the game?
Right.
What if I have explored this huge amount of the map and then I die?
Yeah.
Do I have to go through the whole map again, or is this progress saved and you keep every item that you already found? Because this, which seems pretty obvious, wasn't that obvious during the development. And that's one of the things that we changed with that playtesting session. I think that we weren't saving the progress after dying. People got really angry about that during the playtesting session, because you had to remember, I went to this place and I picked this item, and then I had, I don't know, money in this place, and this boss is over here. And we enter in kind of a crisis state in the team, because we needed to fix that.
Right.
But we weren't sure what to do. At the end, it's like with the weapon change. The solution, the final decision, is something that after it's made, it looks pretty obvious and simple, but it wasn't.
I was going to say that one of the versions of when saving the game was the classic Metroid or Castlevania approach, that is, you save on a room, okay, or
Right.
the player in our case, and when you die, you appear there. Like you were never there except the guild. Okay, so it was like, okay, this is a little weird. You go back to, you restore the state, but the guild is there, and that doesn't seem, that doesn't have much sense. So
yeah, because the guild is on a zone of the map that you haven't discovered yet.
Exactly, it was like
because we were removing the progress on the map. That was one of the first versions.
Yeah. I get it. Okay, for listeners, so when you die in Blasphemous 2, you gain guilt, and that changes like mechanics and different like what abilities you have and how much mana, etc. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, sorry, for a moment there I was like, I thought you were saying that the guilt always appears somewhere you haven't been, and I was like, wait, did I just completely miss that on my playthrough? But no, I understand now. I mean, so because you roll back to map progress. Yeah. Okay, awesome. Yeah,
but it was like, okay, the idea now sounds obvious, but a lot of games implement the, like we did like Metroid, and it just works. But when we tried, it didn't work for us.
Yeah.
So
it changed enough of the Metroid formula that you've broken a standard element of it. Yeah.
But it sounds obvious, but it's not so obvious, because if for Metroid works, why it doesn't work for us?
Yeah. And you've ended up with, I guess, a checkpoint system that I guess is the only Souls-like, well, one of the most Souls-like remnants, where you kind of have this, like, you save at a checkpoint, and that's where you come back, and then you have to go pick up your guilt in a very kind of, awesome way. Perfect. Wonderful. We are getting close to time, so I wanted to ask a couple of questions to wrap up. And I guess the first one, do you keep an eye on the speedrunning scene for Blasphemous 2? You mentioned earlier that players, being conscious that players will break things. Do you pay attention to what they're up to?
Honestly, I keep an eye on the community in general, mostly on Reddit. Most of the people from the team are not really, don't really interact with the community, but we read a lot. There are people who are constantly interacting with the social media, but most of us don't. We see what people comment about the game and what they want us to do with the game. This morning, I sent the lead programmer one thread from Reddit in which someone was talking about the progress of the rapier and dagger. And hey, check this and see how much reason this person has. But for the speedrunning thing, I haven't seen anything yet for Blasphemous 2.
Okay.
We did for Blasphemous 1,
Yeah.
and I remember that the first speedrun that we saw as a team, I was cooking on the kitchen, and I had my iPad on the side, and I was checking the speedrun, and I was like, how is he doing that? What was that jump? Because there was a bug on the jumping, let's say, system, because Blasphemous 1 didn't even have proper systems that allowed players to jump in an infinite amount of distance. But I haven't seen that for Blasphemous 2.
Okay.
It's not that it doesn't exist, honestly. I'm sorry. I don't know. Now I'm curious. When we finish this, I will
There's
go
some
and
fast
check.
runs. Yeah, there's some fast runs. There was the fastest run. There was a really fast run that got submitted for Games Done Quick that I believe the reason it got rejected was because you patched it. And I don't think you patched it intentionally, but a patch you released fixed the run. So
there was only
Yeah.
we made only one update to the game, and honestly, I don't remember.
It was
Yeah.
it was a sub 40-minute run, and then the patch fixed it, which was
Yeah,
amazing.
I remember it was something like pause the game when doing
the rune switching. That's one. When you do the plunge attack with the rosary blade, you could use
or something like that, or with prayer that
you use one player.
times.
Yeah, I remember that, and I did that. I did that myself when I saw it, which sends you upwards.
Yeah.
That's one we patched. Yeah.
Amazing. So I guess inevitable question, and it's totally okay if you can't, but can you share anything about what's next for Blasphemous 2, or what else the Game Kitchen is working on?
Well, as a company, I can say that the Game Kitchen is working on multiple projects. Some of those are public, like the VR platform that is being built. But sadly or luckily, most of the projects are not public yet. As for Blasphemous 2, after the release of the game and the update, we took a really long holidays.
Yeah.
Most of the team, those who could afford. I'm sorry for Dani, because he's one of the few who couldn't. And I didn't took as many days as I was supposed to have.
Blasphemous 2 started really soon after Blasphemous 1, right? There wasn't much gap between the two of them.
That's something that we didn't talk about, but Blasphemous 2 started the development while we were working on the 3 DLCs.
Okay. Yeah, so you're long overdue a holiday.
So Blasphemous 2 started in July 2020.
Yeah.
And the first DLC was released, I can't remember. I made a presentation not long ago, and I had to check all the dates because I totally forgot.
Yeah.
I think it was February 21. I think it was more than a year, or maybe September 2020, October. Oh, I'm sorry, I can't remember. I had to check Wikipedia the last time. So yeah, we overlapped the two developments. So
wow, yeah, very overdue holiday. So you took a lot of time after Blasphemous 2 and still thinking about
it? And when we came back from holidays, then we started talking with Mauricio and with our publisher about the future of the game. We haven't decided anything yet. And even if we had, I couldn't say so.
Of course. Absolutely.
But for sure,
I had to try.
Yeah, I know. For sure, there's always things that teams want to add to a game. I don't know who said this, but games are not finished, but abandoned. So
yeah,
we would like not to abandon it yet.
Yeah.
But
that feels truer than ever in the age of, games being patched online. Long gone are the eras where you shipped a cartridge and didn't have to think about it ever again. Awesome. Perfect. Well, thank you both so much. This has been delightful. It's always nice to learn more about how the games we play are built. So thank you both for your time today.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for having us.
Excellent. Thank you for having us, Joe.